Rob Tebbutt here for Boxing News. Delighted to be joined by Stevie Spark. We're here in Guadalajara. We're just a couple of days out from Canelo, Ryder, and of course, your fight, Stevie, with Gabriel Valenzuela. How are you?
I'm really good, mate. Thanks for having me on the show.
Thanks very much for joining us. You actually caught up with one of our guys on Boxing News recently. We've now got you in print and we've now got you on video. So, becoming a little bit of a star on Boxing News.
Yeah, it's really great. Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. Let's just jump straight into it. I mean, I'd like to kind of talk a little bit about yourself and kind of your backstory and your history up to this point before we, of course, talk about the fight in a couple of days' time. A quick look at your box rec and your wiki and finding out where you're from. It says you're from Toowoomba.
Toowoomba, Queensland, Australia. Yeah, it's been an hour and a half from Brisbane. I spent pretty much most of my life there. Originally from Western Australia in Australia, and moved there when I was about 11 or 12. And I actually grew up in a small country town called Crow's Nest. Like 2,000 people live there, and that's where I first started boxing at a little recreational centre, and then moved into Toowoomba. Yeah.
I'm always keen to speak to, I mean, obviously recent years, particularly probably the last 3 or 4 years, Australian boxing's really coming along. You've got, obviously, you've got Tim Tszyu, of course, an ex-opponent of yours. You've got Jai Opataya, the cruiserweight champion at IBF. So it's a really kind of flourishing part of the world for boxing. But it has its other sports. Obviously, Aussie rules, football, footy, cricket, and rugby, etc. So it's not always kind of the first sport for Australia back in back home. Was it always kind of boxing for you? Did you kind of trial other sports before you got there? Yeah,
I mean, I played soccer when I was younger, played a bit of AFL. Coming from WA, AFL's a big over there. But when I moved to Queensland, it's all, rugby and NRL, so played a little bit of that. But I guess I'm the type of person too, I don't really like relying on other people for getting results. So I, took up boxing pretty young, and, I just enjoy having to rely on myself, because you don't put the work in, you don't get the results. And I guess too, also when you talk about the big sports back in Australia, that's probably the reason why a lot of Australian boxers don't get a lot of airtime as well, because you do have your 3 major ones like cricket, AFL, NRL. They get a lot more airtime on free to air, and people can follow the careers of the people and they get to know them on a personal level, whereas boxers really don't get that sort of same airtime because it's not a tier 1 sport back home. But it is starting to grow and it is getting bigger, and there is people like myself, Tim Tszyu, and Jai Opataya, George Kambosos, we're starting to change the game. And I feel like, I'm doing the hard way, where you have to go overseas and develop a name over here, probably more so first. And then I'd love to take it back to Australia, where I can sell out arenas back home. So, but it's great. I know I've got a whole country supporting me for this one and tuning in back home. There's going to be plenty at the pubs and at home cheering me on. So very excited to defend my belt and get back home.
Yeah, it's a sports mad country, isn't it? I mean, whether it's kind of one of the main sports you've mentioned there or boxing, I mean, Australia really is a country that really backs their own. Yeah,
for sure. We're definitely, we do get behind their own, and it's good to see that more boxers are starting to get a little bit more traction and more support back home, not just, your select few. So I think it still needs more media coverage of all of the boxers and not just a particular few. So the more that grows, the better for everyone.
I mentioned there about Toowoomba, also the home of a certain Michael Katsidis, one of the great Australian fighters, certainly one of our favourite fighters that we kind of watch.
Probably the one that destroyed a lot of dreams in England.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah,
I think they called him the Brit Basher at one point, didn't they?
Yeah, Graham Earl's actually from about 20 minutes down the road from
really?
me. So yeah, he's from a place called Luton. Lovely part of the world. If you've never been to Luton, not so much. Sorry if anybody's watching from Luton. But yeah, he's Michael Katsidis. He'll be a great fighter. Always give tremendous value. Was he somebody that you used to watch growing up and sort of take some inspiration from?
So originally, when I first moved into Toowoomba, I boxed at a local PCYC. Kind of knew of Brendan, my trainer manager. I was about 13, 14 at the time. He used to bring Braden Smith and into the PCYC to spar some of our fellas, and obviously I knew he was the coach of Michael Katsidis. And then eventually I ended up moving up to Smithy's gym, obviously Brendan Smith's gym, where Michael Katsidis was sort of training. And he was also such a big idol of mine when I sort of first moved there and got to see him train, and obviously what he achieved in the sport. So I've been with Brendan now for 11 and 12 years. But yeah, mate, growing up as an amateur, you get to see people like that train and what they achieved and been at the highest level. It was a kick for me. And actually, when I first started the gym, I didn't get to meet him for a while, because every time he'd come into the gym, I wasn't there, or I'd miss him, and I was only 15, I want to meet this bloke, So for me to, meet him, and I actually got to share some rounds with Mick towards the end of my career, which, to me, that was a dream come true at the time, and to see me now flying the flag of the gym and of my country, you know, hopefully I can achieve what he achieved in the sport one day.
What's your favourite Katsidis fight? And don't, you know, you can say it was him bashing up a Brit if you want, but which ones you kind of stand out? There's a few to choose from, by the way.
Yeah. I mean, he did so many amazing things in the sport. I really enjoyed his fight with, you know, when he first went to England and beat Kevin Mitchell. He went Graham Earl first, then obviously beat Kevin Mitchell. But I liked when he fought Marquez, you know, even though he didn't get the win there, he you know, put Marquez on his ass and come so close to beating him, you know, and obviously just after he'd lost his brother. And, you know, Mick's been in so many wars, and like you said, he puts his heart on the line every single time, and I try and emulate that with my fights. You know, Brendan Smith seems to train hard-hitting fighters. You know, we breed him tough in the country, and everyone back home in Australia calls me country hands because they spar me, and so I got, you know, big punching power. So, yeah, mate, I'd love to do what half of Mick did in the ring one day.
You mentioned there about kind of sparring with him towards the tail end of his career. What was that experience like?
Yeah, it's definitely a learning experience. I mean, he wasn't obviously Michael Katsidis of, you know, who he was back in the day, but it was definitely some valuable stuff that, you know, he taught me, and one of those bucket list things you get to sort of tick off. But, you know, since then I've been in the ring with many great fighters now, so it's awesome.
Let's talk about kind of more current affairs, if you will. First and foremost, kind of going back, I mean, I don't want to focus on your loss to Tim Tszyu.
It's funny, you know that? So, like, that's like 2 years ago nearly. And I still get people come up to me. Like, every time Tim has a fight or something, people come up to me in the street still. Oh, gee, mate, you did so well against Tim. And I go, you know, I've had a lot of fights since then. A lot, and all wins, you know what I mean? I've had all wins. I've been to America, and now I'm going to Mexico, you know, so... It's funny, but it's good people still recognise me from that fight. You know, I got a lot of attention from that fight, and I guess people still praise me for stepping in on the late notice, which is awesome.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going with it. I mean, the fact that you kind of boxed up at super welterweight, obviously took the fight at short notice after Michael Zarafa pulled out. Obviously, never good to lose a fight, but what did you take from that? The positives that you took from the fight with Tim Tszyu?
Yeah, like, I mean, I wasn't even in the gym training really. Like, I was doing a bit of shadow boxing because I said I had a broken hand, and you know, I was just not really doing much because obviously that, and I was doing a few runs here and there. But when that sort of phone call rung, you know, I don't think anyone else was taking the fight, not that I heard of. And I guess I just put on a really good performance previously with Jack Brubaker. So I was like, I'm just going to go down and have a crack. Like, it's my punching power. I know I can sort of bang with anyone. I know if I land against anyone, it's going to change the course of a fight. So with the fitness I had and the conditioning I could get in 6 days, I thought, why not? You know, and it was a big paycheck, and I thought, I wasn't going down there with a lose mentality. Like, I was going down there to win and have a crack, but I knew everything was stacked against me. But I had a big effort, and you know, it didn't happen, and unfortunately. But I got a lot out of it. I got media, I got money, you know, it propelled me to be able to do the sport full time. I don't know if you know, but at the time I was still working part time in a pub when I got the call, and you know, from that point I got a lot of sponsors, and now I'm able to do the sport since then full-time as a full-time athlete, and look how well I've gone. You know, it makes the biggest difference being able to be a full-time athlete, where a lot of these fighters don't get that liberty, you know. So it's been a blessing for my career. I wouldn't change a thing. I have no regrets on it. Yeah,
it's a great attitude to have. I mean, it shows the benefits that can, you know, come with taking a risk. I think kind of more so nowadays in the modern era of boxing, you know, fighters are slightly more reluctant to take certain risks. You know, fair play.
Protect the O, yeah.
But, you know, going in there and admittedly coming up short against somebody who is a world-class fighter at 2 weight classes bigger than your kind of your optimum weight just shows the benefits that you can have from taking those risks and taking those chances.
For sure. And you never know what can happen in the sport. When those little 8-ounce, 10-ounce leather gloves go on, it changes the whole game. Like, people talk about sparring and stuff too, and I'm like, it's just different, you know. I'm the type of fighter too. I fight better than I spar. And like, it's just a different game. Some people lift under the lights, and I believe I'm one of them people. So it was a calculated risk in my opinion, and you know, it was the headshots actually weren't really bothering me that much. It was just no conditioning, so the body shots started to take their toll towards the end. But yeah, it's been good since then.
Final one on Tim Tszyu before we talk about yourself and all of your wins and everything that you've got coming up. How good do you think he can be? Obviously, we've seen him in recent performances. His Tony Harrison performance, arguably the performance of his career. He's knocking on the door for that undisputed title against Jermell Charlo. How good do you think he can be?
Yeah, I hope he wins the undisputed title, so I can be like, oi, I'm a 140 pounder, and I went down to 40 him on 6 days notice. You know, for me, I want him to win that undisputed, and as a fellow Aussie, I'd love to see him go out there and win that. He's obviously got the interim title now with a great win over Harrison, and Tim seems to be going from leap to leap every fight. You know, every time that he sort of takes that little step up, everyone's sort of, you know, not giving him much a chance, especially in that last one there. So it's good to see, and they're building Tim nicely. And I think, you know, the best thing about Tim is his activity. You know, he's staying very active and getting a lot of fights under his belt. I think that's key in boxing, is to definitely stay active and keep learning. And he's dealt with many styles along the way in his career. And you look at Charlo now, a lot of time out of the ring. There's going to be a lot of question marks, I believe, in his back of his head going into that fight with Tim Tszyu, which I believe will still happen, you know, very soon. I think Tim's taking a fight in the interim as well, another fight. So, mate, I back Tim to beat Charlo. I really do. I think he's going to shock the world, shock Vegas or wherever it happens. I think he's going to shock everyone. And it's going to be great for Australian boxing. It's going to put Tim up on that pedestal where he can sort of create bigger nights back in Australia as well, where other fighters can fight on, which I want to do myself as well. I want to be able to earn my stripes over here, bring some titles back to Australia, and give the young fighters that may not have the platform back home the platform to be able to go out there and perform, and the opportunity that they deserve.
It kind of follows on from what we were talking about earlier on with Australian boxing being in such a great place, and the fact that Tim Tszyu is
streaming with talent at the moment,
exactly,
mate. Yeah,
and it's a brilliant way
to
look at it. There's only
really sort of
yourself.
one promoter doing, you know, TV shows down there now. They've got all the rights to the TV, so the more shows Matchroom can get to down there, the better for these boxers where there's a bit of competition, and it's only going to give, you know, Matchroom good content. You know, there's some great fights to make down there. There's some with international opponents and themselves. You know, I was one of the fighters that said to Eddie, you know, more so, give me an opportunity overseas. I don't want to fight here. Like, I feel like I've conquered Australia and done what I need to do here. Get me the opportunity overseas. So, but there's so many back home that, you know, there's some great domestic matchups that can be made for TV, which will be great, as well as still building their careers to get them to a point where they can come over to overseas and fight.
Moving on to kind of yourself, and I think you mentioned the Jack Bruback performance, which is kind of, you know, with all due respect to him, you know, a good win for you there. But I think your breakout performance was, of course,
for sure,
against Montana Love, where, you know, I actually watched that on a runway on my phone.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, and I felt like, I don't know how you feel about it, but I felt like you were robbed of what looked to be
stoppage win,
progressing into a very impressive win.
Yeah, like earlier on in the fight, you know, he's very dangerous, very snappy, very twitchy fighter, so you got to be careful of. He's a counter boxer, obviously he's moving, so you got to be careful of overreaching and getting countered. And I knew like it was going to be more of a down the stretch thing. So when I got the knockdown, it was sort of more of a bonus, but I was like, well, I can hurt this bloke, you know. And I've seen him get dropped before, and he can be hurt. Like I knew I can hurt him, so I knew it was a matter of time. And I know my work rate, and I throw punches in bunches, and I can explode. And I feel like I was getting on top of him. I could feel his energy shifting, and he was getting frustrated, and he didn't like the pressure that I was bringing towards him in that fight. And I was slowly closing the gap more and more and more. And yeah, like he just got frustrated, and I've never heard a fighter get cut and say they can't see, I can't continue. You know, we always want to try and finish and keep going. So, and he could see completely fine. Lost his head and threw me over the rope. Got a lot of views and all that sort of stuff, and great to see that the decision was upheld with the referee. But you know, it was one of those things like, you know, I felt like I was going to get a great stop, a TKO victory, where either he was going to stop in the corner or his corner was going to stop it, or the ref was going to jump in. You know, like it was. I really felt that was coming in rounds 9 and 10. I really do.
How, like, if you can, explain what was going through your mind when you were royal rumbling over the top rope?
Honest God, I don't even really remember it. Like, I just remember being flipped, and I was like, fuck, I'm gonna tuck my head here, because, you know, like, you don't want to spear out like that. You got gloves on, you can't really do much with gloves. So I thought, I'm just going to tuck my head and hope for the best, and sort of landed on my shoulder and then tuck my head and then landed on my feet, luckily. But I mean, it could have been very bad. It could have went straight over the ring and landed on my head on the concrete. So, I mean, it's one of those things where you just think it's madness that they even tried to, you know, overrule the decision of the referee. Because if I'd done that to him in Cleveland, I wouldn't have probably been to get out of that place alive. So that's the way I look at it.
Yeah, I mean, I was very, very surprised to hear Eddie Hearn's kind of protests after the fight. For me, in my opinion, people may not agree, it's kind of as cut and dry of a disqualification as you're ever going to see. But you landed it, you looked good when you did it.
But I got straight back in the ring, and I was like, are we still going? What's going on? Like, I was ready to go, and then my coach said, no, the referee's disqualified him. And, you know, the whole thing with Eddie saying that, you know, oh, it was a bad call. What if Anthony Joshua had been thrown out of the ring, or Canelo, you know, one of his main fighters? You know, that's the way I look at it. And at the time, I was the sort of the opponent coming in fighting, and also too, I think he just wanted to see how the fight would have unveiled later on down the track. You know, it was really starting to shape up to be a good fight and just starting to heat up. So, you know, I think that's more so where the fact come from. And as a promoter, you want to see the fight unfold into what it can be. But there was no rematch ever discussed from their side, and now we've got a contract with Matchroom, and here we are in Guadalajara, about to fight on the biggest card of the year, so it's all worked out.
It's all worked out indeed. And with that, of course, a mutual opponent of Montana Love is the man that you're fighting this weekend, Gabriel Valenzuela. Of course, boxed Montana Love, dropped him, and ultimately came up short against him. How much do you rate Valenzuela? What are you expecting from him this Saturday?
He's a good fighter. He's a hell of a fighter, but I'm a better fighter. I think he does things good, and he's got a few select things that he does good, but I do everything he does and a bit better. I believe I'm a bit more of a complete fighter than him. He is similar to he counter boxes a lot more. I've watched so much tape on him. I was actually meant to fight him originally. We discussed about a Venezuela or a Robbie Davies back last year, and then I ended up with Montana Love. So, I've watched a lot of tape on him. I know what he does. Yeah, look, he's going to be hard to beat in Mexico. This is his hometown. He's going to be fighting with 50,000 people, cheering him on and egging him on. I'm expecting probably the hardest fight of my career. Obviously, it's when you get to this level, though, they're all hard fights. And if you want to be a world champion, and I'm talking like I want to be, you have to go out there and be able to beat people like this and beat them in good fashion. So my idea is to come here and get a knockout out of Venezuela. He does some things well, but he also does some things bad. And I look to exploit them on the night.
You mentioned there about there's going into the lines then, and then there's fighting a man from Guadalajara in Guadalajara in front of 50,000 screaming Mexicans. But you don't strike me as somebody who's really bothered by that.
You know what? I've never really been too bothered by even when I fought Tim down in Newcastle, there's thousands of Newcastle people against me, and even Jack Brubaker when I fought him in Wollongong. It's never really fazed me, to be honest. I just sort of take it in my stride. I don't know. It's never sort of been a thing that I've worried about. Look, it's going to be a totally different atmosphere, but I believe I'm ready for this because I've had little step-ups, little increments over my career. Like I said, I've had those little step-ups against Jack and then Tim, and then obviously went to Cleveland where there was 8,000, whatever, against me there, and they were yelling profanity at me on the way to the ring, and it was wild in Cleveland. It was crazy, and even after I was getting booed and all that, even though, my job's just to rock up and fight. I don't make the calls. So I'm expecting something similar here on Saturday night times 10. It's going to be crazy. But I feel like I'm the type of fighter when like I said, I fight better than I spar or train. So I feel like it makes me smile, it makes me kind of happy, and I get to perform and get to showcase my talents to an even greater scale of people. And that's why we chose to take this fight with Venezuela. It's a big risk, but it's got a huge reward. I'm on the main card. I think I'm 1 or 2 fights before Canelo. It's going to be filled up by then. There's going to be millions of eyes on it around the world on DAZN, the biggest platform there is. It makes the most sense to me to take this fight, and it's a winnable fight. And it's a fight I can go out there and look good in, whether it's a war or it's a shutout. I don't care. I just got to get the win.
You mentioned there about being a war or a shutout. I mean, for me, for having watched you box and having watched Valenzuela box, I can't really see how this fight doesn't deliver. I think this is going to be all action from the first bell to the last.
It's great matchmaking by Eddie Hearn and Matchroom. Looking at it stylistically, it's going to heat up. It just has to heat up at some point. He fights with his hands a little bit lower. I like to get in there and he counters. It's such an intriguing matchup, but he's got 16 knockouts. I've got 14 knockouts. We both got high knockout ratios. So from that, I just don't see this fight going the distance with so much riding on it. I know I need to get a knockout, and I know something's going to happen. Something's going to have to give, and it's either going to be me or him. And I'm telling you right now, it's not me.
It's a good time to be a 140-pounder as well. Not only is the division is quite open now after Josh Taylor's obviously vacated a few belts here and there. You've got the 135-pounders on the way up, the likes of Ryan Garcia. I don't envision Devin Haney staying down at lightweight for very much longer and coming up. So it's a great time to be a super lightweight.
I want to fight Ryan Garcia next. That's the fight I want. Respectfully, I think if I can get through Venezuela in good order, I think that I really want that fight with Garcia. He's coming to 140 permanently, and I think that's another exciting matchup. I'm not getting too far in the future, but I think you need to be excited and motivated by the possibilities that are available to yourself after these fights and getting these sorts of wins. But I mean, there's so many big fights myself. I'd fight Regis Pregaeus. I'm number 10 in WBC. The WBC was saying to me today that I can fight for a world title at any point when you're in the top 10. So there's so many possibilities, and if he does sign with Matchroom, obviously there's talks of that. Nothing confirmed yet, but there's Liam Paro, who's got a world title eliminator with Jose Ramirez. You've got the WBA title being fought. I'm in the number 11 there. So there's so many possibilities. The IBF title by Subriel Matias. I think out of all the fights in the divisions, I think he's the toughest of them all. I think he's the hardest fighter of the division. And obviously Josh Taylor, who's got the WBO. But I imagine the WBA is going to be tied up for a bit. You got Rowley fighting for it, and then the English bloke.
Hara Davies.
Hara Davies apparently fought for the eliminator, so he's going to be up next. So there's a few of the titles, tied up, and now Shogo's fighting.
Agashev.
Yeah, he's fighting for the IBF apparently because no one took it in the top 15. We were offered that, but I was committed to this fight here. So yeah, there's so many big fights out there at 140, and it's exciting, because there's so many, and a lot of them are it's funny. A lot of them are big punches in the 140 division. Like a lot of them have got high knockout ratios and exciting styles. Teofimo Lopez. There's so many big fights. Like I said, Devin Haney probably coming up to 140. It's an exciting division, and it's good. There's some big money fights to be made there.
Certainly is. You mentioned there about Ryan Garcia. What did you make of his performance against Gervonta Davis?
Yeah, I think Ryan probably showed he was a little bit more one-dimensional than probably people thought when he was faced with a bit more than, just people he's going to walk straight through. I think he's still very dangerous. He obviously is very fast, very twitchy, very athletic, can punch obviously very hard. But there is a lot of flaws in his game. Gervonta said he doesn't have the best footwork. His defense isn't all that great. He's not really worried about what's coming back a lot of the time. But look, he had a crack, and he fought one of the best in Tank Davis. Tank doesn't throw a lot of punches, but when he does throw, he's very accurate and very, very precise and hits hard. So he's a hard fight for anyone. But I would love to welcome Ryan Garcia to the 140 division.
Final quick couple from me. I do appreciate your time the day before the weigh-in. You mentioned there about Teofimo Lopez, Josh Taylor, of course. They're going to box in New York on June 10th. How do you see that playing out?
Josh Taylor every day of the week, yeah.
What makes you say that?
I just think he's a bigger fighter. He's a mentally tougher fighter. I think that last fight's going to be stuck in his head. And Teofimo, his last fight was Sander Martin. That was very average against a southpaw. I don't know. I just think I think Josh Taylor's going to be too good, too drilled, too skilled for him. And yeah, I think Josh Taylor gets the win there every day of the week.
Okay, right. Before I let you go, Stevie, I want you to look into that camera there, and I want you to tell everybody around the world what's going to happen this weekend when you box Gabriel Valenzuela in the Lion's Den here in Guadalajara.
Righto, so I'm in the Lion's Den this weekend, May 6th in Guadalajara, and I guarantee that I'm going to knock out Gabriel Valenzuela on Saturday night.
You heard it here first. Thanks very much, Stevie Spark. Really enjoyed catching up with you. Best of luck this Saturday.
Thanks very much, mate. Appreciate you having me on.